And there were books that talked about it that said that, you could take marijuana and make food, medicine, you could make gasoline from it. But all these other industries who were reliant upon, their totally cost and cursive ways of raising gasoline by mining or whatever, their industry depended upon not having a new product on the market, so they suppressed that information. But when New Rome came into being, it opened the Druids saw an advantage to bring bongweed into a whole new beginning, into a new world, into a way so that everyone could partake of it, a gateway, if you will, to mainstream it, to bring it out so that people could go to New Rome and take part in a culture that was based spiritually in the Druids' faith. So they came down and they got a hold of Caesar, and they let him, of course, I guess you could say they got him high or they enhanced him or something, but whatever it was they did, it worked. And he let them set up shop, and he set up their labs, and they began to grow the bongweed. Now you got to bear in mind that this wasn't just a cover for some sort of drug trade. This was really a spiritual thing. They really believed that this herb, this natural occurring grass, was a solution to everything. That was their religion, and they began giving it away. When people would come out to party there, they had this stuff, and they would pump its essence through the air of the Colosseum. And I mean, since everything was more or less covered because of sheets of fabric and everything to provide shade, because bear in mind, the ozone layer was gone. That provided shade, but it also created a bit of a seal, so this essence that was floating through the air, everyone was, they were all becoming enhanced. Now you can imagine what kind of this place was a wild place to party before, but imagine that now they have this narcotic which is pumped through the air, and if it's not strong enough to get you high just from contact, it was given away for free. There was these clerics of druids who would walk around and hand the stuff out. It was just unbelievable. And on top of that, there was, instead of having it done in seasons, it was done in shifts. You would work and play, and you'd work making food, and then you'd have your time off, and the whole time, you were kind of sedated and enhanced by the bongweed. As you can imagine, the growth that came from this was exponential. The city started to just explode. New Rome had more growth in the 5 years following than in the 10 years it was before that. The war was still raging, and the government turned a blind eye to what was happening because, again, anything that was a distraction. With that much growth, the scrap vendors wanted to move in. They wanted to really set up, because they saw so many people there. They would send out their trucks and be able to set up the vending machines, these waste tech, that kind of crowd. But the problem was that they'd send out their vending machines and their trucks, and the trucks would wind up part of the wall. The employees would jump ship and join with the New Romans and denounce their companies and give everything to this great cause. If you still look with a set of binos on the wall, you can see shattered and burned out sections of vending machines. This was, of course, before they started putting explosives in. It didn't take the vendors long before they realized that, New Rome was not a place for the vendors market. So things were looking up. Everything was at peace, and the city was growing. The bongweed was there. But then they got to another tier. They got to another point where the spiritual implication of the druids and all that, and with the growth, that's when the infighting started. There's people had their own ideas about how things should be run, how they began questioning Caesar's rule. Before it was just a guy on his property, but now, because there were so many people, they were like, no, New Rome shouldn't be a dictatorship, and they started having all these ideas about democracy and all this kind of jazz. Caesar had a good thing here. He didn't want to have it wrecked by a bunch of these folks who were going to take away his dream. Over the years, he'd allowed a child to be born from one of the orgies. It was his. And it's never known who the mother was, but he took this daughter, and that was to be his heir, his princess. And she's the current princess of New Rome, Princess Sabbatha. And she will inherit all of New Rome one day. But because of these people, these usurpers who were trying to, set up this way of taking control, there came a time when he couldn't allow that anymore. He couldn't allow to have these political activists in his city. Because after all, it was a private city. It was his city. So he had to do something. And that was when he created the New Roman Templars. Before, the security forces were just, bouncers and some ex-military who came back on leave and stayed. But when he created the New Roman Templars, they're an order unto themselves. They're almost all of them are soldiers who took an oath to enforce the will of Caesar. Like it was the will of God. I mean, they were all, heavy bongweed users, and they knew that they'd seen being a soldier is a unique lifestyle because you get to see how life exists inside of so-called democracy and communism. You see governments all over the world at their worst. And to the soldiers, following one man's rule was a lot like the military, so it made sense to them. And so they followed his orders. And the New Roman Templars do not question the will of Caesar. So, in a matter of days, the people who were creating problems in New Rome were gone. People said they left or they'd gotten fed up, but the truth was known that they were buried out in the desert somewhere. The Templars moved through it and slaughtered them. This, at the time, would have caused any society growing to be infuriated, but the truth of the matter was with all the bongweed in the air and the free use of the narcotics, no one really wanted to stand up. They were just kind of complacent. The same way it was when he started it, how, the stress and everything that was there that brought the creation of New Rome, he created that again, and now the stress was starting to build, but he already had the bongweed in place, so the people just kind of went along with it. Any unrest that he did have, he focused the attention on allowing fights in the Colosseum. Like the old Romans saying, give them bread and circus and the people will be happy. And this opened a whole new source of revenue as well. The Colosseum, of course, by this time had grown massive. It was this huge stadium with binocular posts, and people would look down into this huge field where, they'd have these fights, and they had barricades and all sorts of, it changes from time to time, obstacles set up where they would have, unlike championship fights in the past where they'd have one-on-one. Sometimes they do that, but they'd have one-on-one fighting on a steel beam that fell 200 feet to the earth, or they'd have 10 people fighting 10 people with swords. It was unreal bloodshed, and the government didn't really mind, but they couldn't say anything if they did mind, because Caesar had signed a contract with a few of the networks to allow them to televise this on pay-per-view events. So as powerful as the government was at this time, the core politicals who stood to make huge money from these staged gladiatorial combats, the government couldn't move in on it. They couldn't stop it because of the interest that the core politicals held in the governmental funding. So that was probably the point when things